When you think about history, are there lots of old guys wearing wigs and stockings? When you think about history, is Napoleon really short? And folks have wooden teeth. Do you know that history can be the most incredible, amazing stories for you and me? Sit back and listen to a story right now. It's honest, it's fun, and it's sure to.
Hi, young historians. Welcome to another episode of Anytime Now. I'm Brooke, co-founder of Honest History. Are you as excited about this episode as I am? I sure hope so. We're about to dive into another story-filled adventure and learn something new. And remember, by learning more about the past, you can make a positive impact on the future. So pack your bags and let's go.
Picture this, a mysterious figure dressed in a black tuxedo. He orders his drink, shaken, not stirred, and within moments, he's chasing villains through the street, dodging danger at every turn. He goes by the code name 007, but maybe you've heard his full name. It's Bond, James Bond. Today, James Bond is the world's most famous fictional spy, which means he isn't real. He's a character in a book, and he was imagined by a British author named Ian Fleming. But what if I told you James Bond wasn't entirely made up? As they say, there's a little truth behind every great story. This is the tale of Ian Fleming, the secret missions that inspired him, and the real James Bond. Our story begins in 1945. The sound of an airplane rumbled above. A group of British soldiers piled into a jeep to drive across the German countryside. Everywhere they looked, they saw abandoned buildings, scorched trees, and deep holes in the muddy ground. It was the final months of World War II. For 6 long years, Britain had been locked in a fierce battle against Nazi Germany. Now, the war was coming to an end, but the danger was far from over. The soldiers didn't see anyone else on the road, but they knew better than to feel safe. As they drove, they kept their eyes peeled, searching for snipers and landmines hidden along the way. These weren't your ordinary soldiers. They were members of a top-secret group called the 30 Assault Unit. Dressed in green berets, these men worked in small teams and often bent the rules. Their mission? To steal Germany's top-secret information. And this was a very important job. During the war, Germans had moved many of their important documents out of the cities to secret hiding places. They thought this would keep their documents safe, but the 30 Assault Unit was specially trained to sniff out secrets. The soldiers tiptoed their way behind enemy lines, on the hunt for Nazi weapons and secret codes. They picked locks, cracked safes, and discovered workshops hidden in forests. They even found weapons stashed in farmers' barns. Each discovery the unit made meant the British were that much closer to winning the war. One afternoon, while driving along these German roads, the soldiers spotted something unusual in the distance: a massive castle. They had been given a tip that this castle, called the Tomback, was important. Instead of heading straight there, they decided to take the long way around, carefully dodging German officers and battlefields. By the time they finally reached the castle, the sun was beginning to set. Several of the men hopped out of their cars and began walking around the towering building. One of the officers peered through the castle's large window. To his surprise, he spotted bookshelves filled with papers. And these weren't any ordinary papers. They were marked with a green cross. That was the German symbol for top secret. "Come on!" the men shouted to the others. They began tugging at the castle doors until they finally found one that opened. With guns drawn, the soldiers crept inside the castle. A German officer appeared with his hands in the air. "Who is in command of this castle?" the British demanded. "Walter Gladish," the German replied. Mr. Gladish came into the room to meet the British intruders. He quickly explained that the castle was being used to store Germany's war records. That meant there were top-secret papers for wars dating back all the way to the 1870s. The unit commander, Jim Glanville, stood there in disbelief. His men had just struck gold. Who knew how many secrets were tucked away in that castle's library? The 30 Assault Unit had just uncovered the Nazis' hidden archive. There was no time to lose. Jim Glanville sped off in a jeep to find help. He needed to tell someone what they had just found, and he needed more soldiers to guard the precious castle. News of the discovery soon reached London. British intelligence buzzed with excitement, and no one was more thrilled than the man who had created the 30 Assault Unit, Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming lived in London and came from a wealthy English family. He had been recruited into the British Naval Intelligence at the beginning of the war. Part of his job was to help the British Navy gather secret information about Germany. This information would give the British the upper hand in the war. Ian began as the director's personal assistant, but he soon became a trusted advisor. He even had his own code name, 17F. From his desk, Ian dreamed up bold schemes for secret missions. One of these wild ideas was the 30 Assault Unit, a group of secret agents who crossed enemy lines to hunt down information. In 1942, his dream came true and the 30 Assault Unit was formed. Even though the unit was Ian's idea, he wasn't always the most popular with the soldiers. Ian planned their daring missions, but he had never been on the battlefield himself. Some of his ideas were so wild, they were impossible to carry out. When Ian heard about the German castle, he was eager to see the archive for himself. A library full of war intelligence, he thought. It was more than he ever imagined. In May, he packed a bag and traveled to Germany. By that time, the Nazis had officially surrendered, but Ian was worried the Russians would claim the castle for themselves. Once in Germany, he hopped on a jeep and sped off towards Tombach. He burst through the castle doors to find several British-American officers. They had worked hard over the past few days to keep the documents safe. Many German workers had threatened and even tried to set fire to the precious papers to keep them out of the hands of the British. Ian ran into the castle's library and stood in awe before the towering bookshelves. It would take trucks and ships to transport the documents back to England. But Ian wasn't too worried. He had a way with words, and he was sure he could charm enough people to get the job done. Jim Glanville, the unit's commander, led the operation. Within a few days, all the documents were organized, packed, and shipped to London. Uncovering the Nazi archive was just one of the 30 Assault Unit's many achievements. For 3 years, the secret agents carried out hundreds of daring missions across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Even today, much of what they did remains top secret. After World War II, the 30 Assault Unit's missions came to an end, but their legacy was just beginning. Their adventures had given Ian an incredible idea. What if, he thought, he wrote a book all about spies?
Hi friends, are you enjoying today's episode? I'd like to take a quick break from the story to tell you about another great place to learn about the past. Honest History creates magazines and books for kids that are filled with fun stories and activities that bring history to life. From pirates to spies to great inventions and so much more, you'll learn about interesting people, places, and events from around the world that made history. Created for kids ages 6 through 12, you can sign up and receive new adventures delivered straight to your doorstep every quarter. Just visit honesthistory.co. That's honesthistory.co to sign up today. Oh, and here's a special offer for our podcast listeners. Use code ANYTIMENOW for 10% off. Again, that special code is ANYTIMENOW. Okay, let's get back to the story.
By 1952, Ian Fleming had left his life in London and was living in sunny Jamaica. He bought a large piece of land on the island and built his new home called Goldeneye. Each morning, he woke to the sound of waves and the scent of sea air. He looked out at the white sand and turquoise water as he ate his favorite food, scrambled eggs. After breakfast, Ian sat down at his typewriter and loaded it with a fresh piece of paper. He rubbed his chin as he looked out the window. He was thinking, I want to write a spy story to end all spy stories, he said to himself. Suddenly, he had an idea. You could hear the clack of the typewriter echo throughout the house. Chapter 1, he typed, The Secret Agent. His story began in a smoky casino at 3 a.m., but what would he name his agent? Ian stopped typing and sat back in his chair. It must be something simple and plain, he said. He looked around the room and spotted a book he had recently read. It was a book about birds in the West Indies. The author of the book was named James Bond. James Bond, Ian whispered. That's it! That's what I'll name my secret agent! And with that, the famous spy was born. By noon, Ian had written over 2,000 words. He stacked the pages and tucked them away in a folder. The next morning, he did exactly the same thing. He ate his scrambled eggs, sat down at the typewriter, and wrote for 3 hours. 6 weeks later, Ian had finished his first novel. He called it Casino Royale. It was the story of a British secret agent with a license to kill, codename 007. Most people know the secret agent by his now famous name, James Bond. At first, Ian wasn't sure what to do with this book. He didn't even know if he wanted to tell anyone about it. Is my story any good? He wondered. One day, he nervously sent a draft of his novel to a friend to see what he thought. Much to his delight, his friend enjoyed the story and sent it to a publisher. The publisher skimmed over the pages of Ian's story and shook his head. It was not the sort of thing he usually printed. It's not up to scratch, the publisher said, but Ian's brother, Peter Fleming, quickly stepped in. I think you should publish Ian's book, Peter told the publisher. Peter was an accomplished writer and daring adventurer. His word was enough to convince the publisher to take a chance on Ian's spy novel, and it paid off. Casino Royale was a huge hit. Readers across Britain were captivated by the thrilling spy and his deadly missions. As people read Ian's novel, they couldn't help but wonder how much of it was true. So you think you see the line between fact and fantasy is a very narrow one, Ian explained. I think I could trace most of the central incidents in my books to some real happenings. Ian put a good bit of himself into James Bond. Bond liked golf, scrambled eggs, and fast cars, just like Ian. But unlike Bond, Ian had never been a secret agent. Instead, he borrowed stories from the 30 Assault Unit and even his brother Peter's life. You must know thrilling things before you can write about them, Ian advised. Imagination alone is not enough, but stories you hear from friends or read in the papers can be built up. Ian's time with the 30 Assault Unit had given him a lot of stories to work with. It didn't take too much imagination to come up with the rest of Bond's adventures. And when people asked him how he came up with the name James Bond, he admitted he stole it from a book that he had read. There really is a James Bond, you know, but he's an American bird expert, not a secret agent, Ian said. I'd read a book of his. I recalled the book and lifted the author's name outright. Ian Fleming never really thought about what would happen to the actual James Bond once his book was published. That is, until he received a letter in the mail. It was from a woman named Mary Bond. Curious, Ian tore the letter open and began reading. To his surprise, it was a letter from the wife of the American bird expert, the wife of the real James Bond. It came as a surprise when we discovered that you had taken the name of a real human being for your rascal, Mary wrote. She said her husband had been getting hundreds of phone calls from strangers asking to speak to the real James Bond. Ian chuckled as he read over Mary's message and sat down to write a reply. He invited James and Mary Bond to his home in Jamaica. You must visit Goldeneye, he wrote. You can see where the second James Bond was born. 3 years later, the Americans took Ian up on his offer. They showed up at his house in Jamaica without warning. Surprised and a bit nervous, Ian shook hands with the real James Bond. There's something I need to say, James confessed. I don't read your books. My wife reads them all, but I never do. I don't blame you, Ian replied. Before James and Mary left, Ian handed James a signed copy of one of his books. Inside, Ian wrote, "To the real James Bond, from the thief of his identity." It was his way of saying thank you to the man who unknowingly helped him create the famous spy. Just 6 months later, Ian Fleming passed away at the age of 56. He had written 12 James Bond novels and lived to see 2 of them become movies. Today, there are 25 films and counting based on the spy Ian created. But as we've learned, James Bond wasn't entirely made up. The daring missions of the 30 Assault Unit were real, and their legacy lives on in 007's thrilling adventures. And his name? Borrowed from an American bird expert who never imagined he'd be mistaken for a famous secret agent. From the battlefields of World War II to the pages of a best-selling novel, Ian Fleming turned real-life missions into the world's most famous spy.
Welcome back! What did you think of today's adventure? We hope you learned something new. Be sure to share the story with your friends and family, and use what you've learned today to go out there and make a positive impact on history yourself. That's all for now, but if you want to learn more about important and amazing stories from the past, be sure to subscribe to Honest History Magazine, where you'll discover stories from around the world. Thanks for listening. This episode was narrated by Randall Lawrence and written by Heidi Coburn. Production was led by Robot Pirate Media. To learn more about Honest History, visit us at honesthistory.co and follow along for updates on social media.